For decades, people believed Hitler's private diaries had been found. They were supposed to reveal the private thoughts of one of the most hated men in history. A German magazine paid millions for them. Historians examined them. The world's media wanted the story. And then, everything collapsed. Because there was one problem. Hitler never wrote them. The diaries were fake. But the real story was even stranger. Because this wasn't just the story of one clever forger. It was the story of how ambition, money, secrecy, and the desire to believe nearly created one of the biggest media scandals of the 20th century. In 1983, a German journalist named Gerd Heidemann became involved with what appeared to be the discovery of a lifetime. Private diaries, supposedly written by Adolf Hitler. Heidemann was fascinated by Nazi history and memorabilia, and when he was introduced to a mysterious source who claimed to have access to Hitler's personal writings, he believed he had found something extraordinary. At first, there was one diary, then another, then more. Soon, the number kept growing. The documents were presented as a lost collection of Hitler's personal writings, and the story surrounding their discovery seemed almost too incredible to be true. According to the claims being circulated at the time, the diaries had somehow survived the final days of the Third Reich. Their supposed history made them even more valuable. But there was a problem. The more Heidemann investigated, the more money became involved. And eventually, the German magazine Stern paid around 9.3 million Deutsche Marks for the diaries. Millions. For Hitler's handwriting. The stakes had suddenly become enormous. This was no longer just a historical discovery. It was potentially one of the biggest stories in modern journalism. Stern now had something the rest of the world wanted. Hitler's private thoughts, his personal decisions, his memories, his version of history, and the magazine wanted to publish. But before that could happen, the diaries had to be authenticated. And this is where the story became even more dangerous. Some experts examined the handwriting. Some believed it was genuine. Among those who initially accepted the diaries was the respected British historian Hugh Trevor Roper. And that mattered. Because if a historian of his reputation believed the diaries were authentic, then surely they had to be real. The story began attracting international attention. The media wanted access. Publishers wanted rights. The world was preparing to read the private thoughts of Adolf Hitler. But while everyone was asking, what did Hitler write? Almost nobody was asking a much more important question. What were these diaries actually made of? Then, the first cracks appeared. Scientific examination began to challenge the story. The paper, the ink, the materials, the physical evidence. Something was wrong. The materials used in the diaries were inconsistent with documents from Hitler's lifetime. Some of the supposed historical evidence simply could not exist when Hitler was alive. The story was collapsing. And then came the final blow. The diaries were not authentic. They were forgeries. The handwriting was fake. The history was fake. And the entire discovery had been built on a lie. But now came the question everyone wanted answered. Who had created them? The answer was a man named Konrad Kujau. Kujau was not simply copying a signature. He had studied Hitler's handwriting. He understood the world of Nazi memorabilia, and he knew how to make a fake object feel authentic. He created the diaries, he created the story surrounding them, and he created the illusion that they had survived from Hitler's past. The deception was so convincing that it had passed through journalists, experts, historians, and one of Germany's most respected magazines. Kujau had not simply forged a document. He had forged a piece of history, and Gerd Heidemann, the journalist who had helped bring the diaries to Stern, was now at the center of the scandal. The man who thought he had discovered one of the greatest historical treasures of the century had instead become part of one of the greatest journalistic embarrassments in modern history. The story ended in court. Kujau was exposed as the forger. Heidemann was also convicted in connection with the scandal. The diaries were fake, the millions were gone, and the reputation of one of Germany's most important magazines was badly damaged. But here's where the story gets interesting, because the biggest question isn't. How did one man forge Hitler's diaries? The bigger question is, how did so many people become willing to believe them? The answer wasn't just one thing. It was money, ambition, secrecy, media pressure, and something even more powerful, the desire to believe. Everyone wanted something from the story. The journalist wanted the biggest discovery of his career. The magazine wanted an enormous exclusive. Publishers wanted the rights. The media wanted the first story. And the public wanted to look inside the mind of Hitler. The more valuable the story became, the harder it became to admit that it might be wrong. And that is what made the deception so powerful. The forger didn't have to convince everyone, all at once. He only had to convince the right people, one at a time. First, a journalist, then a magazine, then an expert, then the media. And suddenly, the lie had become bigger than the man who created it. That is the real story of the Hitler Diaries. Not that someone managed to imitate Hitler's handwriting, but that someone created a story that powerful people desperately wanted to be true. The diaries were fake. The scandal was real. And perhaps the most disturbing part isn't that someone forged Hitler's past. It's that people were so eager to uncover a secret that they forgot to ask the simplest question. Was it ever real? Because sometimes, the most convincing lies aren't the ones that are forced upon us. They're the ones we already want to believe.